Hell's Angel found a little girl sleeping beneath a bridge. Then he saw the baby hidden under her coat. The rain came down in thin, silver needles, catching the glow of Tank Morrison's headlight before scattering into the dark. He rode with his shoulders low and his grip easy on the handlebars, the way a man rides when he's traveled the same road so many times his hands know it better than his mind does. Route 9 was empty this time of night. It usually was. Just Tank, his old Harley, and the hum of wet asphalt beneath his tires. He passed the Sinclair gas station first, its sign flickering. Half the letters burned out, so it just read in Lair now. Tank almost smiled at that. Diesel had a joke about it every time they rode past together, something about how it sounded like where he lived. Then came the shuttered diner with the faded rooster on the roof, and the old grain silo that had been empty since before Tank was even patched into the club. Landmarks. Markers on a road he'd ridden 1,000 times, alone more often than not. That was the thing nobody talked about. Not out loud, anyway. Being a Hell's Angel meant brotherhood. Sure, it meant loyalty and family, and men who'd bleed for you without blinking. But at the end of the night, when the clubhouse emptied out and the bikes went quiet in the gravel lot, Tank rode home to an apartment with bare walls and a refrigerator that hummed louder than his television. 45 years old, and the only thing waiting for him at the end of this ride was a cold bed and a 6 a.m. Alarm, before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. He'd made his peace with that a long time ago. Or told himself he had. Tank had learned early that people leave. His father left when Tank was 6. His mother worked herself into an early grave trying to make up for it. The one woman he'd let close back in his 20s had looked at his leather cut and his scars and decided she wanted something safer. Tank didn't blame her. He'd stopped blaming anybody for anything a long time ago. It was easier to just accept that some men were built for the open road and nothing else. Responsibility wasn't in his blood. Family wasn't his to have. He'd made peace with the silence. The rain picked up, drumming harder against his helmet, and Tank leaned into the throttle a little, eager now to get home and out of the wet. The tires hissed against the slick road. Up ahead, the highway dipped beneath the old Route 9 overpass, a squat concrete tunnel that always ran a few degrees colder than the road around it, shadowed even in daylight. At night it was just a black mouth swallowing the highway whole. Tank had ridden under that overpass more times than he could count. He never thought twice about it. It was just another stretch of road between him and his bed. But tonight, as his headlight swept across the pylon at the base of the bridge, something caught the light and held it. Something small. Something that didn't belong. Tank's stomach dropped before his mind even caught up with what his eyes had seen. He eased off the throttle, slowing the bike almost without meaning to, his brain scrambling to make sense of the shape huddled against the gray concrete. A pile of trash, maybe. A stray dog curled up out of the rain. That would make sense. That would be normal. But dogs didn't wear coats. The shape didn't move as his headlight passed over it a second time. Slower now, Tank's whole body going tense and still the way it used to on tours overseas. That old instinct clicking into place before conscious thought could catch up. Small, curled tight into itself. Unmoving, Tank's hands acted before his mind fully decided anything, easing the bike toward the shoulder, gravel crunching and popping under his tires as he rolled to a stop at the edge of the road. He sat there for a second, engine idling low and rough beneath him, rain drumming steady on his helmet, and stared through the dark toward the pylon. He told himself it was probably nothing. Some kid's forgotten jacket. A trick of the shadows and the rain. But he didn't ride away. Tank swung his leg over the bike and let it idle there on its kickstand, the headlight still throwing its pale beam toward the pylon. His boots hit the wet gravel, and for a second he just stood there, rain tapping against his shoulders, listening. Nothing. No sound but the rain and the tick of his cooling engine. "Hey," he called out, keeping his voice low and even, the way he might talk to a spooked horse. "Somebody there?" Still nothing. But the shape hadn't moved, and now that he was closer, Tank could see it clearer. A kid. Had to be. Too small to be anything else, knees tucked up tight. Back pressed into the corner where the pylon met the underside of the bridge, out of the worst of the rain but not all of it. Tank's chest tightened. He'd seen a lot of things in his life. Bar fights that left men in the hospital, brothers he'd buried too young. But something about a kid alone under a bridge at midnight hit him in a place none of that ever had. He moved slow, hands loose at his sides, the way he'd learned a long time ago that big men had to move around anything small and frightened. He was 6'2" and built like the side of a barn, and he knew what he looked like coming out of the dark in a leather cut with rain running off his beard. "Hey now," he said again, softer this time. "I ain't gonna hurt you. Just checking you're all right." He was maybe 10 feet away when the shape jerked, flinching so hard it hit the concrete behind it with a soft thud. A face turned up toward him, pale in the dark, eyes wide with a fear so sharp it looked like something physical. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Her coat swallowed her whole, sleeves hanging past her hands, the collar swallowing her chin. Her hair was plastered to her forehead with rain, and her lips had gone a shade of blue that made Tank's stomach twist. "Stay back," she said, and her voice cracked right down the middle, half a shout and half a whisper. She scrambled backward, but there was nowhere to go, just more concrete behind her. "Don't come any closer." Tank stopped where he was. He crouched down slow, dropping himself low so he wasn't looming over her anymore, getting down to her level the way he might with a spooked animal or a brother coming down off something bad. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I'm staying right here. See? Not moving." She stared at him, chest heaving, water dripping off her chin. Up close he could see how young she really was. 10, maybe 11, too young to be out here alone in the middle of the night, rain soaking through a coat 3 sizes too big for her. "Where's your mom, sweetheart? Your dad? Somebody come looking for you?" "I'm fine," she said too fast, the words tumbling out on top of each other. "I'm just watching my sister. My mom's coming right back. She just went to get something. She'll be right back. I'm fine. I'm not lost." Tank didn't believe a word of it, but he kept his face calm, kept his voice low. "Sure," he said. "Sure, okay, but you're freezing out here. Let me just take a look at you, make sure you're not hurt anywhere." He reached out, slow and careful, meaning only to touch the sleeve of her coat, to feel how soaked through it was, how cold she'd gotten sitting out here against the concrete. His fingers had barely brushed the wet fabric at her shoulder when she twisted away from him hard, curling her whole body forward and down, wrapping both arms tight around something pressed against her chest, hidden beneath the folds of that oversized coat. "Don't," she said, and this time there was no fear in her voice at all, just steel. Just something fierce and immovable. "Don't touch her." Tank went still, his hand hanging in the air between them. His eyes dropped to the shape she was curled around, the way her whole body had gone rigid to protect it, the way her arms had locked like a cage around whatever she was hiding beneath that coat. It wasn't a bag. It wasn't a toy. It was small. It was round at one end, poking up just above the collar of her coat. And it was moving, just barely. A tiny rise and fall, slow and steady, like breathing. Tank's blood went cold. "Hey," he said, and his voice had changed now, gone soft in a different way, careful in a different way. "Hey, easy, I'm not gonna touch anything. Look, my hand's right here, see? Not moving." He pulled his hand back slow and held it up, palm out, the same way he did when he was trying to calm a brother who'd had too much to drink and too many bad memories crowding in on him at once. The girl watched him like a hawk, her whole body still curled forward, still shielding whatever was tucked against her chest. "I just want to help you," Tank said. "That's all. I swear it. You don't gotta be scared of me." For a long moment, nothing happened. Rain kept falling, tapping soft against the concrete overhead, dripping in fat drops off the edge of the bridge behind them. The girl's eyes searched his face, back and forth, like she was trying to read something written there in a language she wasn't sure she trusted. "My name's Tank," he said, when the silence stretched too long. "That's not really my name, but it's what everybody calls me. I got a bike right there." He tipped his head toward the Harley, its headlight still cutting a pale cone through the rain. "I was just riding home. Saw you here. Figured maybe you needed some help." Something in her shoulders loosened, just a little. "Not much, but a little." "Maddie," she said finally, quiet, like the word cost her something. "My name's Maddie." "Maddie," Tank repeated, nodding slow. "Okay, Maddie, that's a good name." She was still watching him close, but her arms had eased up some, not all the way, just enough that Tank could see the fabric of her coat shifting where she held it. And then, careful, so careful, like she was making a decision that scared her more than anything else that night, she loosened her grip. The folds of the coat fell open just a little, and Tank's breath caught somewhere in his chest. A baby, a tiny baby, wrapped up tight in a second coat, smaller than Maddie's, swaddled close against her body, where her own coat had been holding in whatever warmth she had left to give. The baby's face was scrunched up in sleep, cheeks round and pink despite the cold little puffs of breath coming slow and even. Tank had seen a lot of things in his life. He'd seen men bleed out on barroom floors. He'd seen brothers overdose in bathroom stalls. He'd ridden through storms that should have killed him twice over. But nothing in 45 years had hit him like the sight of that baby's face peeking out from beneath a 10-year-old girl's coat under a bridge at midnight in the pouring rain. "Maddie," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "Where's your mom at, sweetheart?" Maddie's chin came up fast, some of that steel rushing back into her eyes. "She's coming right back," she said. "She just went to go get something. She said to wait here and watch the baby, and that's what I'm doing. I'm just watching her, that's all." "Okay," Tank said slow. "Okay." "When'd she leave?" "She's coming right back," Maddie said again, faster this time, the words tripping over each other. "She's coming right back. I'm not lost. We're not lost. She's coming. She said she'd be right back, and I believe her. She's coming back for us. She promised." But her voice was shaking now, cracking around the edges like ice on a pond that couldn't hold any more weight, and her arms had tightened again around the baby, pulling her close, like she could will her mother back into existence just by saying the words enough times. Tank looked at her. Really looked at her. At the blue lips and the soaked hair and the fierce, terrified eyes, and he understood, with a sinking feeling settling deep into his gut, that whatever this girl believed, whatever she needed to believe to get through the night, it wasn't the truth. Not by a long shot. Tank crouched there a long moment, rain running off the back of his neck, and turned it over in his head the way he'd turn over a busted carburetor, looking for what piece was broken. Call it in. That was the right thing. That was the thing a normal man would do, a man with a badge or a clean record, or a house with a porch light on somewhere. Pull out his phone, dial, wait for the flashing lights, hand these two off to people trained for exactly this kind of thing. That was the safe answer. The responsible answer. But he looked at Maddie's face, at the way her jaw was set even while her whole body shook with cold. And he knew what would happen the second she saw a police car pull up. She'd bolt. Or she'd shut down so hard, nothing he said would reach her again. And that baby wrapped up like a secret nobody was supposed to find, she'd get swept up into whatever system existed for kids nobody could account for, and Maddie might not even get to ride in the same car. He'd seen enough of the system from the outside, watched enough of his brother's kids get shuffled through group homes and foster placements, to know it didn't always move gentle. Sometimes it moved right, and sometimes it moved like a machine that didn't care whose hands got caught in the gears. "Maddie," he said, keeping his voice low and even, "I'm not gonna call anybody who's gonna take that baby out of your arms tonight. I promise you that. But you're freezing. Both of you. I can see you shaking from here. How long you two been under this bridge?" Maddie's eyes flicked away from him, down toward the baby's sleeping face, then back up. "Guarded. Not long," she said, but her lips were the color of a bruise, and the lie sat there between them plain as day. "Okay," Tank said again, like he believed her, though he didn't. "Look, I'm not a cop. I'm not gonna arrest anybody or take your sister away. I just know you can't stay here. Not in this rain. Not in this cold. That baby's gonna get sick, and so are you. We're fine," Maddie said. But her voice cracked right down the middle of the word, and the fierce look in her eyes wavered, just for a second, before she caught it and pulled it back into place. Tank thought about calling one of the guys, thought about the clubhouse, warm and lit up with the old wood stove going, Preacher probably still awake, reading in his chair. Diesel definitely still up watching something loud on the TV. It wasn't a place made for kids, never had been. But it was warm, and it was full of men who, whatever their pasts held, wouldn't hurt a hair on either of these girls' heads. It wasn't a station house. It wasn't a shelter. But it was something. "I got a place," he said. "It's not fancy, and it's full of guys who look about as scary as I do, but it's warm, and there's food, and nobody there is gonna hurt you or take that baby away from you. I just need you to trust me for one night. Just one night, so you two aren't sitting out here freezing." Maddie stared at him, searching his face again the way she had before, like she was trying to find the catch in it, the trick, the thing that would prove he was just like every other adult who'd let her down. Tank held still and let her look. He didn't reach for her, didn't rush her, just knelt there in the rain, letting the seconds tick by, letting her decide in her own time. The baby stirred against her chest, gave a small, unhappy sound, and that seemed to break something loose in Maddie, some last thread of resistance snapping under the weight of exhaustion and cold, and 2 days of carrying a weight no 10-year-old should ever have to carry alone. "Okay," she whispered, so quiet he almost lost it under the rain. "Okay, but I'm not letting go of her. Not for nothing. Not even a second." "Wouldn't ask you to," Tank said. And meant it. He stood up slow, joints protesting after crouching so long, and held out his hand, not to take the baby, not to take anything, just an offer. There, if she wanted it. Maddie looked at it, then pushed herself up on her own, cradling the baby tight against her chest, coat pulled close around them both. "Come on," Tank said. "Bike's right there. Not far to go." The ride to the clubhouse took 11 minutes, but it felt longer with Maddie's small arms locked around his waist and the baby tucked between them, shielded from the wind by both their bodies. Tank kept the speed low, taking every turn slow and careful, feeling every bump in the road like it might be the one that shook something loose. He'd never driven so carefully in his life. The clubhouse sat at the end of a gravel lot, a long metal building with motorcycles lined up out front and lights spilling yellow and warm from the windows. Tank cut the engine and sat there a second, feeling Maddie's grip loosen slow, like she wasn't sure her legs would hold her. "This is it," he said. "Told you it wasn't fancy." Maddie didn't answer. She was staring at the building, at the row of bikes, at the faint sound of a television laugh track drifting out into the wet night air. Tank could see the fear creeping back into her face, the same fear that had been there under the bridge, and he understood it. To a 10-year-old, a building full of strange men must have looked like walking into the mouth of something. "Nobody in there's gonna hurt you," he said again. "You got my word." She still didn't say anything, but she climbed off the bike when he did, the baby pressed tight against her chest, and she followed him toward the door with her chin up, even though her legs were shaking. Tank pushed the door open and stepped inside, bracing himself. He didn't know what he expected. Maybe a room full of confused faces, maybe somebody cracking a joke that would make Maddie flinch. Maybe Diesel yelling something too loud and scaring the baby into crying. He'd walked into that clubhouse 1,000 times with all kinds of trouble trailing behind him, but never anything like this. The television was the first thing to go quiet. Diesel had been sprawled across the old couch, remote in hand, and he sat up so fast the springs groaned under him. His eyes went from Tank's soaked jacket down to the two small shapes huddled behind him, and something shifted in his face. Fast, like a switch flipping. "Tank," Preacher said from his chair by the wood stove, setting his book down without marking the page. His voice was calm, but his eyes had already found Maddie's face, found the shape under her coat. "What happened?" "Found them under the Route 9 overpass," Tank said. "They're freezing. Need blankets. Need this place warm. Need it now." Nobody asked a single question after that. Preacher was up and moving before Tank finished the sentence, pulling the quilt off the back of his own chair, the one he'd had since before Tank even joined the club, worn soft from years of use. He crossed the room in long strides and knelt down in front of Maddie, moving slow, keeping his voice low the way you'd talk to a spooked animal. "Hey there," he said gently. "Let's get this around you both, all right? Just to warm you up. Nothing else." Maddie flinched at first, but something about the old man's face, the deep lines around his eyes, the patient way he held the blanket out instead of throwing it over her, made her let him drape it around her shoulders. Diesel was already at the kitchen table, sweeping aside a stack of old newspapers and an ashtray with one arm, clearing the whole surface in one motion. "Get her over here," he said, voice rough but not unkind. "Table's clean. She can lay the baby down if she wants, long as she's comfortable doing it." "Somebody get the stove going hotter," Preacher called out, already moving toward the kitchen, digging through cabinets. "And somebody call Sully. See if that all-night pharmacy on 5th is still open. We're gonna need formula, diapers, whatever they got." Tank stood in the doorway, rain still dripping off him, and watched his clubhouse, his brothers, men who'd bled beside him, gone to war beside him, done things in the past none of them were proud of, transform into something he'd never seen before. Diesel crouched down to Maddie's eye level, asking soft questions about the baby, careful and slow. Preacher was already boiling water, laying out towels, working with the calm efficiency of a man who'd done this before, though Tank couldn't imagine when or how. Within minutes, the clubhouse had gone from a place full of loud men and cigarette smoke to something that looked, unmistakably, like a home preparing for children. Tank stood there, stunned quiet, water still running off his jacket onto the floor, and didn't say a word. The baby woke up hungry 20 minutes later, and that chirping little cry set the whole clubhouse into motion again. "That's a hungry sound if I ever heard one," Preacher said, already warming a bottle of formula that Sully had run over from the pharmacy, still in its plastic bag with the receipt stapled to it. He tested the milk on his wrist like he'd done it 100 times before, and nobody asked him how he knew to do that. Diesel held his arms out. "Let me." Maddie's whole body tensed. She looked at this mountain of a man, arms covered in faded ink, a scar cutting through one eyebrow, and she did not move. "I got 4 nephews," Diesel said, gentler than his size should have allowed. "I know how to hold a baby. Kid, promise I won't drop her." Tank watched Maddie's eyes flick to him, silently asking if this was safe. He nodded, once, and something in her shoulders loosened just enough that she let Diesel take the baby from her arms. The transformation was almost funny. This giant of a man, built like he could bench press a motorcycle, cradled that tiny baby like she was made of glass, rocking her slow, humming some tune that didn't quite hit the right notes. The baby quieted almost instantly, staring up at him with wide, curious eyes, and Diesel's whole face softened into something Tank had never seen on him before. "We need to get this baby a stuffed animal," Diesel announced. "Every kid needs a bear." "It's the middle of the night," Tank said. "Sully," Diesel called out. "You still up?" Sully, a wiry man missing half a finger from a bad run-in with a chain, groaned from the couch. "You're killing me, Diesel. There's a 24-hour drugstore 2 miles up," Preacher said mildly. "They got a toy aisle. I saw it last week." 15 minutes later, Sully came back through the door soaked from the rain, holding a brown teddy bear with a red bow around its neck like he'd just rescued it from a burning building. He set it on the table with great ceremony. "Now she needs a name," Diesel said, holding the baby up so she could look at the bear, which she immediately tried to grab with one small fist. "Bear," Sully offered. "That's not a name, that's a description," Preacher said, shaking his head. "Mr. Snuggles," Diesel tried. "Absolutely not," Preacher said, and even Tank felt the corner of his mouth twitch. They went back and forth like that for a while, the men arguing good-naturedly over something as small as a stuffed bear's name, tossing out ideas that got sillier each time. While the baby cooed and grabbed at the bear's ear, oblivious to the debate happening around her. Maddie sat curled in the corner of the old couch, wrapped in Preacher's quilt, watching all of it with careful, guarded eyes. She didn't laugh at the jokes. She didn't relax into the blanket. She just watched, like she was waiting for the moment it would all turn out to be a trick. Like kindness was something that always came with a price tag she hadn't seen yet. Tank noticed. He crossed the room and sat down near her, not too close, keeping a careful distance. "They're not gonna hurt you," he said quietly. "Or her." Maddie didn't answer, but her eyes flicked toward the baby in Diesel's arms, then back to Tank, like she was measuring something. The night wore on slow and warm. The formula did its job, and the baby's eyes grew heavy in Diesel's arms. Maddie's eyelids started drooping too. The exhaustion of 2 days without real sleep finally catching up to her small body, no matter how hard she fought it. "You can sleep," Tank said. "I'll watch her. I'm not going anywhere." Maddie looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for the lie she expected to find there. She didn't find one. Slow, careful, like she was setting down something precious and terrifying all at once, she let her arms unclench. For the first time in 2 days, she wasn't holding the baby against her chest. Diesel eased into the rocking chair by the stove with the baby settled against him, and Maddie curled sideways into the quilt, her breathing evening out into real sleep. Tank sat there in the quiet clubhouse, watching both girls sleep safe under one roof, and felt something settle into his chest he didn't have a name for yet. Something that felt a whole lot like responsibility. Something that felt a whole lot like family. Morning light came in gray through the clubhouse windows, the kind of light that comes after a storm when the rain has stopped but the sky hasn't decided what to do next. Tank had not slept. He'd sat in that same chair most of the night, watching the baby breathe against Diesel's chest, watching Maddie's face twitch through whatever dreams a 10-year-old has after 2 days under a bridge. By 7, the coffee pot was going, and Preacher was scrambling eggs like this was any normal morning in a clubhouse full of men who'd found 2 children in the rain. The baby woke first, chirping her hungry little sound, and Diesel got up stiff and groggy to warm another bottle, moving like he'd done it every morning of his life. Maddie woke slower. Her eyes opened, and for 1 second, just one, she looked like any other kid waking up somewhere warm. Then, she remembered where she was, and her whole body went stiff, eyes darting until she found the baby safe in Diesel's arms. Only then did her shoulders drop. Tank waited until she'd had a few bites of eggs, until the baby was fed and settled, until the room had that easy, quiet hum of a morning that wasn't rushing anywhere. Then he pulled a chair up across from her, not too close, and rested his elbows on his knees so he wasn't looming over her the way a man his size tended to loom. "Maddie," he said, "I need you to tell me about your mom." Her eyes snapped up, wary. "She's coming back. I told you. When's she coming back? Soon like today? Soon like she said a specific time?" Maddie's jaw tightened. She looked down at her plate, pushed a piece of egg around with her fork like it was the most important thing in the room. "She's coming back," she said again, quieter this time. Less sure of it. Tank didn't say anything. He'd learned a long time ago, riding beside men who didn't like to talk about their pasts, that silence did more work than pushing ever could. He just waited, steady, letting the quiet stretch out between them. And that was what broke her. "She's not my mom," Maddie whispered. The room didn't go silent exactly. Diesel was still humming to the baby. Preacher still had the skillet going, but something in the air shifted, like everyone had heard it, without stopping what they were doing. "Her name's Casey," Maddie said, and once she started, the words came fast, like she'd been holding them so tight for so long, they didn't know how to come out slow. "She's my cousin. She's 16. My mom's in prison. She's been in prison since I was 7. And Bird's mom, that's Casey's sister. She just left one day and didn't come back, and Casey said she'd take care of us. She said she could do it. She's been doing it for months, feeding us and everything, but then..." She stopped. Her chin trembled. "Then what?" Tank said, gentle. "Then, 2 days ago, she said she was gonna go find help. She said, 'Stay right here. Watch Bird. I'll be back before dark.'" She said it real calm, like she had a plan. Maddie's voice cracked wide open. She didn't come back. It got dark, and she didn't come back. And it got cold, and she still didn't come back, and I didn't know what to do, I didn't know who to call. I just knew I couldn't let anybody see us because they'd take Bird away from me, they'd split us up. And I promised her, I promised Casey, I'd keep her safe. The tears came then, hard and sudden, the kind that had clearly been held back for 2 long freezing days under a bridge, held back through fear and cold and hunger because there hadn't been room for them, not with a baby depending on her. Maddie put her face in her hands and her shoulders shook, and Diesel, still holding the baby, looked over at Tank with something like heartbreak on that big, scarred face. Tank didn't move for a second. He sat there and let the truth land on him the way a punch lands, slow and then all at once. This wasn't a lost kid waiting on a mother who'd wandered off. This was 2 abandoned children with nobody coming, a 16-year-old girl alone out there somewhere who might be in danger herself, and a family that had already fallen through every crack the world had to offer. There was no simple version of this left. No dropping them at a station and riding home. Whatever this was now, it was his. Tank let Maddie cry until the tears ran out on their own. He didn't try to stop her or rush her. Diesel just stood there, rocking Bird a little slower. His eyes wet, too, though he'd have denied it if anyone asked. Preacher turned off the stove and let the eggs sit. When Maddie finally quieted, wiping her face with the back of her hand, Tank spoke low. "You did good," he told her. "You hear me? You kept your sister alive for 2 days in the cold all by yourself. That ain't nothing. That's about the bravest thing I ever heard of." Maddie looked up at him like she didn't believe it, but she needed to hear it anyway. "I'm gonna go talk to my brothers for a minute," Tank said. "You stay here, eat your eggs, and Diesel's gonna keep an eye on Bird. Nobody's going anywhere. Nobody's calling anybody yet. Okay?" She nodded, small and tired, and that was enough for now. Tank walked out to the main room, where Preacher was already waiting, like he knew Tank would need him. Diesel handed the baby off to one of the younger prospects, a kid named Cutter who looked terrified but game, and followed after, wiping his hands on his jeans. They sat around the scarred wooden table in the back room, the one they usually used for church, club business, votes on patches and problems. Today, it was just the 3 of them, plus Tonk pulled in solely, the club's unofficial fixer, a wiry man who knew half the underbelly of the county by first name. "Here's where we're at," Tonk said, laying it out plain. 2 kids. No mother coming. A 16-year-old cousin named Casey, who's been raising them alone and disappeared 2 days ago. Maddie thinks if anybody official finds out, they'll take the baby away from her. And she might be right. Preacher rubbed his jaw. Child Services finds out there's no parent, no guardian, nothing legal, they're not gonna wait around. They'll split 'em up same day. Different foster homes, most likely. Baby that young, everybody wants a baby. A 10-year-old girl, that's harder to place. That can't happen, Tank said, and his voice came out harder than he meant it to. He caught himself, softened it. That girl already lost everybody once. I ain't gonna be the reason it happens again. So what's the play? Diesel said, arms crossed over his chest like a wall. We find Casey first, Tank said, before anybody official gets involved. She's 16. She's scared. She's probably hiding somewhere thinking she ruined everything. We find her, we bring her back, maybe there's a way to keep all three of them together before the system even knows there's a hole to fill. Preacher nodded slow, thinking it through the way he always did. Careful and unhurried. It's risky. We wait too long. Somebody notices 2 kids living in a clubhouse full of bikers. We got bigger problems than paperwork. I know it, Tank said. But I ain't calling anybody until we've at least tried. Give me a few days. That's all I'm asking. Sully leaned back in his chair. I got ears in some rough spots. Homeless camps, shelters, the underpass squats. Girl her age, alone, scared, she's gonna end up in one of those places sooner or later. I'll ask around. Do it quiet, Tank said. Don't spook anybody. Just find out if anybody's seen a 16-year-old matching her description. Preacher was already pulling out his phone, an old flip thing he refused to upgrade. I got a nurse over at the free clinic on Delancey. Rosa owes me a favor from a long time back, patched up her boy after a bad night nobody needs to talk about. Girls like Casey, scared and alone, sometimes they end up at a clinic looking for help or just a warm room to sit in. I'll call her. And I still got Marv, Diesel added. Old army buddy. He's on the force now, works nights mostly. He can ask around quiet, nothing official, just eyes open for a girl matching her description. He won't file a report or nothing, not unless we ask him to. Tank looked around the table at these men, hard men, men the world had written off a long time ago, and felt something steady settle in his chest. All right, he said. Preacher, call Rosa. Diesel, get in touch with Marv. Sully, hit the camps. I want eyes everywhere by this afternoon. Preacher was already dialing. Diesel pulled out his phone and stepped toward the door, texting as he walked. Sully grabbed his jacket off the back of his chair, nodding once at Tank before heading out into the gray morning. By early afternoon, Preacher found Tank by the coffee pot, phone still in hand. Rosa's got something, he said. Girl came through the clinic 2 days ago. Gave a fake name, but the description matches. Marv's people spotted someone fitting Casey too, near the old rail yard, past the shelter on 9th. Tank set his cup down. Then, that's where we start. The rail yard would have to wait until Tank got back, because right now there was a crib to build, and it turned out that building a crib out of spare parts was harder than fixing a carburetor. It ain't supposed to lean, Diesel said, frowning at the wooden frame he'd hammered together from an old dresser and some 2x4s. Preacher, hand me that level. Preacher handed it over without looking up from the sheet he was reading, a printout Rosa had given him about infant feeding schedules. You could just buy a crib, you know. They sell them at stores. Regular ones. With directions. Where's the fun in that? Diesel muttered, but he took the level anyway, and after another 20 minutes of grunting and swearing under his breath, the crib stood mostly straight in the back room, tucked into the corner by the window where the afternoon light came in warm. Maddie sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, watching the whole operation with the kind of skeptical squint only a 10-year-old could manage. "That doesn't look safe," she said. "It's safe," Diesel said. Offended, I tested it. Look, he pushed on the side rail hard enough that the whole thing wobbled, and Maddie's eyebrows shot up. "Diesel," Preacher said mildly. "Maybe don't test it like that in front of her." "It held, didn't it?" Maddie laughed. Actually laughed. A small surprised sound like it had snuck out before she could stop it. Bird, propped in an old bouncer seat one of the prospects had found somewhere, let out a chirping cry right on cue, and Diesel's whole face lit up. "There she goes," he said, already crouching down to scoop her up. "That's my girl. That's the hungry sound. I know all her sounds now. Tank, you hear that? I speak baby now." "Congratulations," Tank said from the doorway, arms crossed, watching the chaos with something that might have been the start of a smile. He'd been gone most of the day chasing leads with Sully, and he looked tired, but not defeated. By evening, the back room had turned into something that actually resembled a nursery. Blankets were folded in a milk crate. Diapers were stacked on a shelf that used to hold motorcycle parts. Someone had taped a paper cutout of a bird to the wall above the crib, clumsy and lopsided, clearly cut out by hand. "Cutter did that," Preacher said when Tank asked. "Took him 3 tries. Maddie ate dinner at the long table with the rest of them, quieter than usual, picking at her food. Tank noticed but didn't push. He'd learned that much already, that pushing only made her fold up tighter. Later, after Bird had been fed and rocked and finally gone down in the crooked crib, Tank found Maddie sitting on the back steps outside, the door propped open behind her so she could still hear if the baby cried. The night air was cool, but not cold like the night under the bridge. She had a blanket around her shoulders anyway. Tank sat down next to her, not too close, giving her room. For a while, neither of them said anything. Somewhere inside, Diesel was laughing at something Preacher said. "You find her yet?" Maddie asked, finally. "Casey? Not yet. Got some leads. We'll find her, Maddie. I promise you that much." Maddie pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "I was so scared," she said, quiet, like the words had been sitting in her chest for a long time and only now found a way out. "Every night. I kept thinking, what if I fall asleep and something happens to her? What if she gets sick? What if I run out of the formula and there's no more money?" I kept doing the math in my head, over and over, trying to figure out how many days I had left before everything ran out. Tank listened, didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix it too fast. "I had to be the one," Maddie went on. "There wasn't anybody else. Casey tried, but she's just a kid too. And then she left, and it was just me. I couldn't tell anybody because they'd take Bird away. So I just had to be scared by myself and not show it." "You don't gotta be scared by yourself anymore," Tank said. His voice was rough, low, but steady. "I don't know how all this is gonna shake out yet. I ain't gonna lie to you and say I got it all figured. But I promise you this, you ain't carrying this alone. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not for as long as I got a say in it." Maddie looked over at him, eyes shining in the porch light, and for the first time, she didn't look like she was bracing for him to take it back. The call came in just after breakfast, while Tank was standing at the counter drinking black coffee out of a chipped mug that said "World's Okayest Mechanic," a joke gift from some prospect years back. His phone buzzed against the counter, and when he saw the name on the screen, His whole body went still. "Sully." "Yeah," Tank said, answering fast. "Got something," Sully said. "No hello, straight to business the way cops learned to talk after enough years on the job. Might be nothing. But there's a homeless camp out past the old rail yard, edge of town near the river. One of the outreach workers who does rounds out there mentioned a girl matching the description you gave me. 16, maybe 17. Dark hair, real thin, wearing a gray hoodie. Been staying quiet, keeping to herself, hasn't said much to anybody." Tank's grip tightened on the mug. "She say a name?" "No, but the outreach worker said she flinched hard when somebody mentioned calling the shelter to check for family, like she was scared of being found." "That was enough. That was more than enough." "I'm heading out there now," Tank said. Tank, Sully's voice had that careful tone cops used when they were about to say something they weren't supposed to say off the record. "Go easy. If it's her, she's probably terrified. Don't come in like a wrecking ball." "I know how to talk to scared kids now," Tank said, and hung up before Sully could hear the rough edge of emotion underneath the words. He found Diesel out in the garage bay, elbow deep in the guts of Rosa's old truck, a rag hanging out of his back pocket. "Get cleaned up," Tank said. "We got a lead on Casey." Diesel's head came up so fast he nearly cracked it on the hood. "Where?" "Encampment out by the river." "Past the rail yard." Diesel was already wiping his hands, already moving toward the sink in the corner. "I'm coming. Figured you would." Neither of them said much else. There wasn't much to say. They both understood what was at stake. Both understood that somewhere out there was a 16-year-old girl who thought she'd failed two little kids so badly that she couldn't face coming back, and every day she stayed gone was another day that fear had to grow roots. They took Tank's truck instead of the bikes, since the roads out past the rail yard were mostly gravel and mud this time of year, rutted from spring rain. The drive took almost an hour, first through the edge of town where the buildings thinned out, then past the rail yard itself, rusted cars sitting quiet on dead tracks, and finally down a stretch of road that ran along the river, where the trees grew thick and wild. The encampment wasn't hard to find once they got close. A scatter of tents and tarps strung between trees, a couple shopping carts loaded with belongings, the smell of wood smoke drifting through the evening air. The sun was low by the time they parked, throwing long orange light across the water, turning the whole scene soft and gold in a way that didn't match the hard reality of it. Tank got out slow, scanning the camp. Diesel followed, quiet for once, no jokes, no easy grin. This wasn't the kind of place either of them wanted to walk into loud. A few people looked up as they passed, wary. The way people learn to be wary when they've got nothing left to lose but what little piece they've carved out. Tank didn't rush. He kept his hands visible, his voice low when he asked a woman near one of the tents if she'd seen a girl, dark hair, gray hoodie, maybe scared looking. The woman pointed without a word toward a small fire near the edge of the trees, where someone sat hunched close to the flames, arms wrapped around her knees like she was trying to disappear into herself. Tank's chest tightened. Even from a distance, even in the dying light, he recognized something in the way she held herself. The same tucked in, braced for the world stance he'd seen in Maddie under that bridge 2 weeks ago. That same look of a kid who'd been carrying too much for too long and had run out of places to put it down. He walked closer, slow, deliberate, Diesel hanging back a few steps behind him so as not to crowd her. As he got near enough to see her face clearly, thin and hollow-eyed in the firelight. He saw it plain as day. The same fear he'd first seen in Maddie's eyes. The girl's head snapped up the second she caught movement in the corner of her eye. Firelight flickered across her face, and Tank watched the exact moment recognition hit her. Her eyes went wide, then wild, like a rabbit that just heard the snap of a twig. "No," she whispered, then louder, scrambling to her feet so fast she nearly fell into the fire. "No, no, no, Casey." Tank kept his voice low, both hands raised where she could see them, palms out. "Casey. It's okay." But she was already backing away, stumbling over a tree root, her arms wrapping around herself like she could make her body small enough to vanish. "I'm not going with you. I'm not going to jail. I didn't do anything. I didn't hurt them. I would never hurt them. Nobody thinks you hurt them." Tank stopped walking, plaited his boots in the dirt, and stood still. Let her have the room. Let her see he wasn't chasing. "I'm not a cop, Casey. I'm not here to arrest you." "Then who are you?" Her voice cracked on the words, high and scared, the voice of a kid even though her face had the tired lines of someone twice her age. "How do you know my name?" "My name's Tank. I found Maddie under a bridge 2 weeks ago. Her and the baby." Casey went white. All the color drained right out of her face, and for a second Tank thought she might actually collapse. Diesel took a slow step forward like he meant to catch her, but Tank held up a hand, and Diesel stopped. "They're okay," Tank said quickly, because that was the only thing that mattered right now, the only thing that could stop that terror in her eyes. "Both of them, safe, warm, fed. Maddie's been asking about you every single day." Casey's knees buckled. She caught herself against a tree trunk, her hand pressed flat to the bark like she needed something solid to hold on to. "She's okay? The baby's okay? Bird's doing great. My brother's at the club. They've been taking care of both of them since I found Maddie. Nobody's been hurt. Nobody's in trouble." He took one small step closer, slow, the way you'd approach a spooked horse. "I've been looking for you for days, Casey. Not to punish you. Just to bring you home." That word, home, seemed to break something loose in her. Her face crumpled, and for a second she looked exactly like Maddie had that first night under the bridge, fierce and frightened all at once. Like she didn't know whether to run or collapse. "I can't," she said, her voice thin and shaking. "I can't go back there." "Why not?" "Because I failed them." The words tore out of her, loud enough that a couple of people near the other tents glanced over before looking away, minding their business the way people at camps like this learned to do. Casey's whole body was shaking now, her arms wrapped tight around her middle. "I was supposed to take care of them. Mom's in prison. My sister just left. She just left them with me like I was supposed to know what to do. And I didn't. I didn't know how to keep a baby fed, or how to make sure Maddie got to school, or how to pay for anything. And I panicked. And I left her under that bridge and told her to wait, and I never went back, because I couldn't face her knowing I couldn't do it. I couldn't be what they needed." She was crying now, ugly and broken, the kind of crying that comes from weeks of holding something in until it finally cracks the dam. "I'm not a mom," she choked out. "I'm 16. I don't know how to do any of this, and I left them. I left my baby sister and my cousin because I was so scared I couldn't breathe, and that makes me the worst person alive." Tank didn't say anything right away. He let her get it all out, let the fire crackle and the river murmur behind them, let her shake and sob until the worst of it passed. Then, he crouched down slow, so he was eye level with her, the way he might approach a frightened animal, or a frightened child. "You're not the worst person alive," he said quietly. "You're a kid who got handed something too big for you to carry alone, and you carried it anyway, for longer than most grown adults could have managed. That's not failure, Casey. That's love." Her breath hitched. "Come back with me," Tank said. "Stay at the clubhouse. We'll figure the rest out together. All of us. Nobody's gonna make you do this alone anymore." The clubhouse windows glowed yellow against the dark when Tank's truck pulled into the gravel lot. Casey sat curled in the passenger seat, her knees pulled up to her chest, watching the building like it might disappear if she blinked. "You okay?" Tank asked, killing the engine. "I don't know," Casey whispered. "What if she's mad at me?" Only one way to find out. The front door swung open before Tank even reached it. Preacher must have been watching from the window, because he stepped back to let them through without a word, his old eyes soft in the porch light. Maddie was sitting on the floor of the main room, cross-legged in front of the couch, coloring on a piece of paper that Diesel had probably found for her somewhere. She looked up when the door opened, the way she always did now, quick and alert, checking for danger the way she'd learned to under that bridge. Then, she saw Casey. The crayon fell out of her hand. For 1 second she didn't move at all, like her body hadn't caught up with what her eyes were telling her. Then, she was up, scrambling across the floor, and she hit Casey so hard the older girl stumbled back a step. "Casey." Maddie's voice broke on the name, high and cracked, and she buried her face in Casey's stomach, her arms wrapped so tight around her cousin's waist it looked like she never meant to let go. "You came back. You came back. I knew you'd come back." Casey sank to her knees right there on the floor, pulling Maddie into her arms, and the two of them held onto each other like the rest of the world had stopped existing. Casey was crying again, but it was different this time, softer. The kind of crying that comes with relief instead of shame. "I'm sorry," Casey kept saying into Maddie's hair. I'm so sorry, I should never have left you like that." "You're here now." Maddie pulled back just enough to look at her cousin's face, her small hands gripping Casey's arms like she was afraid she might vanish. "You're here now, that's all that matters." From the back room came a soft chirping sound, and a moment later, Diesel appeared in the doorway, with Bird balanced against his massive shoulder, her small fist curled in his shirt collar. The baby was fussing, working up to a real cry, but the second Casey looked up and saw her, she was on her feet, crossing the room with her arms already reaching. "Hey, baby girl." Casey's voice wobbled as Diesel handed the baby over, careful as always despite his size. "Hey, it's me. I'm here." Bird quieted almost instantly, her small face pressing into Casey's neck, and Casey closed her eyes and just breathed her in, rocking gently side to side the way she must have done 100 times before that night under the bridge. Tank stood back by the door, watching the three of them knit back together in the middle of that rough clubhouse floor, surrounded by leather jackets and motorcycle parts, and men who weren't supposed to know the first thing about gentleness. Preacher came to stand beside him, quiet as ever. "Look at that," Preacher said softly. "Yeah," Tank said. He couldn't take his eyes off it. Later that night, after Bird had been fed and settled, and Maddie had finally fallen asleep curled against Casey's side on the old couch, Casey sat at the kitchen table, with a mug of hot chocolate Diesel had made her, her hands wrapped around it like she needed the warmth. The club had gathered loose around the room, some sitting, some leaning against the walls, giving her space but not leaving her alone. "I don't know how to thank you," Casey said, her voice still thick. "Any of you. You didn't have to do any of this. You didn't have to take in 2 kids that weren't yours. And you definitely didn't have to go looking for me." Wasn't a question of having to, Diesel rumbled from his spot by the window. Was a question of doing right. Casey's eyes filled again, and she pressed her lips together, nodding, unable to say much else. Tank stood near the doorway, watching Casey's shoulders slowly unclench, watching Maddie's face soft and peaceful in sleep for maybe the first time since he'd found her, watching Bird's tiny fingers curled loose against her sister's arm. Something settled hard and certain in his chest. Whatever it took, whatever fight came next. He was keeping this family together. 2 weeks passed, and the clubhouse found a new kind of rhythm. Every morning at 7:30, Preacher's old Harley rumbled to life in the gravel lot, idling low and steady, while Maddie climbed onto the back seat he'd rigged special for her, complete with a little strap Diesel had welded on so she couldn't slide off. She wore a helmet 2 sizes too big that Preacher had padded out with foam, and she held on to his leather jacket with both fists the whole ride to school. He never went faster than 15 miles an hour. The other bikers teased him about it, called him Grandpa Snail, but Preacher just smiled that slow, patient smile of his and said a girl only gets 1 first week back at school, and he wasn't about to rush it. Maddie started smiling more. Not all the time. Some mornings, she still woke up quiet, checking the room the way she used to check under the bridge, counting heads, making sure everyone was where they were supposed to be. But by the 2nd week, she was laughing at Diesel's terrible jokes, and she'd taken over a corner of the main room as her own, covering the wall above the old couch with drawings from school. Suns with too many rays. A family of stick figures standing in front of a building with a motorcycle parked out front. Tank found himself standing in front of that wall more than once, just looking. Casey threw herself into her ged, studying like she was trying to make up for lost time. Diesel, of all people, turned out to be the one who stuck with her the longest, sitting across the kitchen table night after night with a battered practice book Preacher had scrounged up from somewhere. Diesel wasn't a genius with numbers, but he was patient, and he had a way of breaking things down that made sense to Casey when the textbook explanations didn't. "You're not stupid," he told her one night, when she'd thrown her pencil down after getting a math problem wrong for the 3rd time. "You're just scared of being wrong. Ain't the same thing." Casey had stared at him for a long moment, like nobody had ever told her that before, and then she'd picked the pencil back up. Bird, meanwhile, was becoming the loudest member of the household in her own, small way. She babbled constantly now, strings of sound that weren't quite words, but were clearly trying to be. And she'd taken to pulling herself up on anything solid, her little legs wobbling with the effort. Diesel got knocked in the shin so many times by her grabbing at his jeans that he started calling her the ankle biter, which made no sense since she hardly had teeth, but the name stuck anyway. It was on a Tuesday evening, about 2 weeks after Casey came back, that Tank found himself standing in the kitchen doorway, unnoticed, just taking it all in. Diesel sat at the table with Casey, a stack of bills spread out between them, walking her through how to divide money for rent and groceries and gas, his big hands surprisingly gentle as he moved the bills into little piles. "This one's for what you need," he was saying. "This one's for what you want. You gotta know the difference, or the money disappears before you know where it went." Casey nodded along, chewing her lip in concentration, writing numbers down in a notebook Preacher had bought her. A few feet away, at the other end of the table, Maddie had her school books spread out, humming to herself as she worked through a worksheet, her tongue poking out the corner of her mouth the way it did when she concentrated hard. Bird sat on the floor nearby in a laundry basket lined with blankets, babbling to a stuffed rabbit Preacher had won for her at a gas station claw machine, batting it with her fists like it had personally offended her. The radio was playing low from the next room. Someone was cooking, the smell of onions and garlic drifting through the clubhouse. Somewhere further back, laughter rose up from a card game. Tank stood there and let it settle over him, all of it at once. Diesel's steady voice explaining budgets. Maddie's hum. Bird's babbling. The whole warm, cluttered, noisy mess of it. And something inside him went quiet and still, the way a room goes still right before you understand something important. This was it. This was what people meant when they talked about home. Not a house, not a place, but this exact feeling, this exact sound, filling up a room that used to just be a place men parked their bikes and drank their beer and avoided anything that looked like family. He hadn't had this in 20 years. Maybe he'd never had it at all. The Saturday of the cookout came in warm and golden, the kind of late spring day that made the whole gravel lot behind the clubhouse smell like cut grass and charcoal smoke. Casey had passed her practice exam on Thursday. Diesel had been the one to find out first, looking over her shoulder at the answer key spread across the kitchen table, and he'd let out a whoop so loud that Bird had startled in her laundry basket and started crying, which only made Diesel laugh harder as he scooped her up to calm her down. "We're celebrating," he'd announced, like it was already decided. Saturday. Whole club. Food and everything. Nobody argued with Diesel when he got an idea like that. By noon on Saturday, the yard behind the clubhouse had transformed. Someone had dragged out 2 long folding tables and covered them with a mismatched collection of tablecloths that didn't match anything. Plastic checkered squares next to a faded 4th of July print somebody's mother had probably owned. Preacher manned the grill like it was sacred duty, flipping burgers with a spatula in one hand and a can of soda in the other, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead even though there was nothing to read. The whole club showed up. Not just the regulars who lived at the clubhouse, but the extended family of the Iron Saints. Men Tank hadn't seen in months. Their wives and girlfriends, and a scattering of kids who ran around the yard chasing each other with water guns somebody had bought at the dollar store. Coolers of soda sat open in the shade. Someone had hooked up a speaker to a phone, and old rock songs drifted out over the yard, mixing with laughter and the sizzle of the grill. Diesel held Bird the whole afternoon, refusing to hand her off even when his arms had to be tired. She sat propped against his massive forearm like she belonged there, chewing on a teething ring, babbling up at him every few minutes like she was reporting important news. Every time she made a sound, Diesel would nod seriously, like he understood every word. "Is that right?" he said to her, dead serious. "You don't say." Bird shrieked with laughter, kicking her feet, and the sound of it carried clear across the yard. A few of the other bikers turned to look, grinning at the sight of a 250-pound man with tattoos up both arms, cooing at a baby like she was the most important person at the party. Casey sat at the picnic table with her GED practice certificate taped proudly to the front of her folder, showing it off to anyone who asked, and plenty of people asked because word had gotten around. She kept touching the paper like she couldn't quite believe it was real. "You did that," Tank told her, setting a paper plate of food down in front of her. "Nobody else. You." Casey looked up at him, her eyes a little shiny. "Couldn't have done it without Diesel yelling at me about fractions." "That sounds about right," Tank said, and she laughed. Really laughed, and it was a good sound. Maddie spent the afternoon running between games of tag and the food table, her hair coming loose from its ponytail, a smear of ketchup on her cheek she didn't seem to notice. She'd found a group of the younger kids belonging to some of the other members, and she moved through their games easy and light, like she'd always belonged there. As the afternoon stretched into evening, the sky turned orange and pink over the tree line, and somebody lit a small fire in the pit at the edge of the yard. The kids gathered around it, and Preacher told some rambling story about a road trip gone wrong that had half the yard laughing before he even got to the punchline. Maddie sat cross-legged near the fire, close enough that the light flickered across her face, and when Preacher finally landed his joke, she threw her head back and laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laugh that came from somewhere deep, unguarded, and loud. Nothing held back. Tank sat back in his folding chair a little ways off, a warm can of soda forgotten in his hand, and watched her. He watched Bird babbling in Diesel's arms. He watched Casey laughing with the other women, her folder still tucked under her arm like a trophy. He watched the fire throw light across all their faces, this strange, unlikely family that had built itself out of nothing but stubbornness and love. He let himself believe, just for that one evening, that this was it. That whatever they'd built here was solid enough to last. The following Tuesday started like any other. Preacher walked Maddie to school on the Harley, idling slow beside her the last block like always, and she waved at him from the front steps before disappearing through the double doors. He rode back to the clubhouse whistling, thinking about nothing more important than what kind of soup to make for lunch. He didn't know that inside the school, in a small office with a window that looked out over the parking lot, a counselor named Mrs. Holloway was sitting at her desk with a folder open in front of her, chewing the end of a pen. She had liked Maddie from the start. The girl was smart, quick with her hands in art class, quiet but not unfriendly. But over the past few weeks, small things had started to add up. Maddie had mentioned once, offhand, that her mom was only 16. Another time, she'd said a man named Tank picked up her paperwork because he was kind of like her dad now, but not really. When Mrs. Holloway asked who lived at home with her, Maddie had rattled off a list of names that included a man called Diesel and someone called Preacher, none of whom sounded like family. Mrs. Holloway had asked around gently, careful not to alarm anyone. What she found didn't add up to a family. It added up to a motorcycle clubhouse full of grown men, a homeless teenager, and 2 little girls with no legal guardian in sight. She didn't think anyone was hurting Maddie. She could see plainly that the girl was fed, clothed, and cared for. But she also knew the law didn't care about kindness. It cared about paperwork. And there wasn't any. She picked up the phone and made the call she was required to make. The knock at the clubhouse door came 2 days later, just after 10 in the morning. Tank was in the garage with Diesel, elbow deep in the guts of an old Softail, when Casey came hurrying out back, her face pale. "There's a lady here," she said. "She says she's from Child Services." Tank wiped his hands on a rag and felt something cold settle low in his stomach. The woman standing in the clubhouse doorway was maybe 50, dressed in a plain gray blazer, holding a leather folder against her chest like a shield. She introduced herself as Miss Reyes, and her voice was calm, professional, not unkind, but there was a weight to it that made the whole room go quiet the moment she stepped inside. Maddie was at school. Bird was down for her nap in the back room. Preacher came in from the kitchen wiping his hands on a dish towel, and Casey stood near the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold. Ms. Reyes looked around the clubhouse, took in the toys stacked in the corner, the crayon drawings taped crookedly to the wall, the playpen folded against the far wall. She didn't say anything about any of it. She just nodded, like she was confirming something she'd already suspected, and asked if they could all sit down. Tank sat across from her at the long kitchen table, Casey beside him, Preacher and Diesel standing behind like a wall. "I want to be clear," Miss Reyes said, opening her folder. "Nobody here is in trouble. I can see these children are cared for." "That's obvious." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I have to follow the law, and right now, the law doesn't recognize any of this as a legal family unit." Casey's hands were trembling in her lap. "I've been taking care of them. I have been." "I believe you, Miss," Reyes said gently. "But you're 16, sweetheart. You don't have legal guardianship of your cousins. You can't. Not at your age. Not without a court granting it." She turned to Tank. "And you, Miss Morrison, have no formal claim to either child. No custody order. No paperwork of any kind." The room had gone very still. Even the ceiling fan overhead seemed to slow. "What that means," Miss Reyes said, her voice softening even further, like she hated the words as she said them, "is that as of right now, all 3 children are considered to be without a legal guardian, which means I have no choice but to place them in emergency care. Separately, if necessary, depending on availability." Nobody said anything. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere down the hall, Bird stirred and let out a small, sleepy cry, and nobody moved to go to her. Tank tried everything he knew how to do. He talked. He explained. He laid it all out on the kitchen table like evidence in a trial. The school records Maddie brought home, the growth chart Preacher kept taped inside a cupboard door for Bird, the receipts Diesel had saved without anyone asking him to. He told Miss Reyes about the night under the bridge, about Casey crying herself to sleep the first week out of pure exhaustion, about how Bird had learned to roll over on the same ratty couch where half the club had learned to play poker. None of it mattered. "I understand," Miss Reyes said. And she did sound like she understood, which somehow made it worse. But understanding isn't the same as authority. My hands are tied until a judge says otherwise. 2 days later, a second caseworker came. She was younger than Miss Reyes, with a clipboard and a car that had a booster seat already installed in the back. She was polite. She was quick. She did not linger. Casey went first. She had known it was coming, and still, when the woman said her name and held out a hand, Casey's whole body folded inward like a paper cup crushed in a fist. "I don't want to go to a group home," she said, her voice small in a way Tank hadn't heard since the day he found her at the camp. "Please, I can take care of them. I can. I know you love them," the caseworker said, not unkindly. "This isn't about that." Casey looked at Tank like she needed him to fix it, the way she had learned to over the past few months. The way a person learns to lean on a wall that has never once let them fall. Tank opened his mouth. and nothing came out. There was nothing to say. He had no paper that said he mattered here. Not yet. "I'll come back for you," Casey told Maddie, crouching down, holding her face in both hands. "I promise. I'm not leaving you." "Not really. This is just paper." "It's not real." Maddie didn't say anything. She just nodded, her jaw tight, her eyes dry, the same hard, careful look she'd worn the night Tank found her under the bridge. Then, Casey was gone, folded into the back of a gray sedan, and the sound of the engine pulling away was the loneliest sound Tank had ever heard. Maddie and Bird were separated an hour later. Different placements, the caseworker explained, because of availability. Because Bird was an infant and needed specific certifications a foster home would have. Because Maddie was old enough to be placed elsewhere. Tank asked, begged, if there was any way to keep the girls together. There wasn't. Not that day. Maddie did not cry when they took Bird. She stood very still in the doorway, watching the woman carry her baby sister out to the car, and something in her face closed like a door being shut and locked from the inside. "Maddie," Tunk said, kneeling down to her level, the way he used to. She looked at him, and for one terrible second, he saw the girl from the bridge again. Guarded, alone, braced for the world to fail her one more time. "You said I was safe here," she said quietly. "You are," Tunk said. "This isn't the end, Maddie, I promise you that." She didn't answer. She let the woman take her hand and lead her to the car, and she didn't look back, not once, and Tank stood on the porch and watched the car disappear down the road until it was just a shape in the distance, and then it was nothing at all. That night, the clubhouse was quiet in a way it had never been quiet before. No hum of the baby monitor. No creak of Preacher's boots pacing the hallway at 2 a.m. No sound of Maddie's cartoons playing too loud in the front room. Tank walked back to the nursery corner they'd built with their own hands. The crib Diesel had sanded smooth, the shelf of picture books Preacher had collected from the library sale. Everything was exactly where it had been that morning. Untouched, waiting, on the floor, half under the crib, was Bird's teddy bear. Worn soft from being chewed and dragged and slept on. Forgotten in the rush. Tank picked it up and held it in his two big hands, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he did not try to stop the sound that came out of him. The days that followed had a strange, heavy weight to them, like the air before a storm that never broke. Preacher stopped humming. Nobody had ever noticed he hummed until he stopped. He used to hum old gospel tunes while he made coffee in the mornings, low and tuneless, but now the kitchen was silent except for the drip of the pot and the occasional clink of a spoon against a mug. He sat at the table longer than he used to, staring at nothing, his hands wrapped around coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Diesel took the crib apart. He did it slow, careful, like he was handling something alive. Nobody asked him to. Nobody told him not to. He just came in one afternoon with a screwdriver and started working the little screws loose, setting each piece against the wall in a neat row, the way you'd lay out tools for a job you didn't want to finish. When Tank found him there, kneeling on the floor surrounded by wooden slats, Diesel didn't look up. "Can't look at it," Diesel said. His voice was rough, like gravel dragged over concrete. "Every time I walk past, I hear her, that little chirp she'd do." He rubbed a hand over his face, and for a second, the biggest man in the club looked like he might come apart at the seams. "Can't do it, Tank." Tank didn't say anything. He just crouched down and picked up a piece of the crib rail, turned it over in his hands, and set it with the others. The clubhouse itself seemed to shrink. Rooms that had felt full and warm for months now felt too big, too quiet, like a held breath. The guys still showed up. They still sat around the long table playing cards, still argued about football, still complained about the weather. But the laughter didn't land the same. It came out thin, and it died fast, like nobody had the heart to carry a joke all the way to its ending. Tank moved through the days like a man doing chores in his sleep. He rode when he needed to think. But even the road didn't help the way it used to. He'd catch himself glancing over at the passenger seat that didn't exist, like some part of him still expected to hear Maddie's voice complaining about the wind in her eyes, or Bird's soft snuffling breath from a car seat that was folded up now, tucked away in a closet nobody opened. He tried to eat dinner at the long table with the others one night, and halfway through, Preacher set down his fork. "Anybody heard anything?" Preacher asked. He didn't need to say from who. Nobody had. Miss Riaz had called once to confirm the girls were settling in, whatever that meant, and that was the last word from anyone. No pictures. No updates. Just silence. The kind that ate at a man from the inside. The kind that made Tank replay every moment from the night under the bridge to the morning the gray sedan drove away, wondering what he could have done different. What paper he could have filed sooner. What word he could have said to make a judge understand faster. He didn't sleep much. When he did, he dreamed of the nursery corner the way it used to be, full of noise and color, Bird's laugh bouncing off the walls, Maddie sprawled on the floor with a coloring book, Casey's tired, grateful smile from the doorway. He'd wake up to the real silence of the clubhouse, and for a few seconds every morning, he'd forget. Then he'd remember, and the weight would settle back onto his chest like a stone. 5 days after the car pulled away with Maddie inside it, Tank sat alone in the kitchen at 2 a.m, the teddy bear from Bird's crib sitting on the table in front of him. He'd been carrying it around without meaning to, tucking it under his arm when he walked from room to room. Like some part of him thought if he just kept it close enough, it would lead him back to her. He stared at it a long time. Then he picked up his phone. His hands weren't steady, not the way they were when he rode a motorcycle down a wet highway at midnight. Not the way they were fixing an engine or throwing a punch. They shook now, plain and simple, as he scrolled to the number Ms. Reyes had given him for emergencies. It rang twice before she picked up, her voice groggy with sleep. "Mr. Morrison? It's the middle of the night. Is everything all right? I need to see her," Tank said. His voice cracked on the words, but he kept going. "I need to see Maddie. Not on paper. Not through some update. I need to see her with my own eyes. Miss Reyes, please, arrange whatever you need to arrange. A supervised visit. Anything. I'm not asking to bring her home tonight. I just need to see that she's okay." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I'll see what I can do," Miss Reyes said finally. "Give me until morning." Miss Reyes called at 9 the next morning. The visit was set for that afternoon, 1 hour, supervised, at a house on Maple Street that Tank had never seen before and already hated. He rode there instead of taking the truck. He needed the wind on his face, needed something familiar to hold on to before he walked into a stranger's house to see a girl who wasn't supposed to feel like a stranger to him anymore. The foster home was tidy. Too tidy. White shutters, a mowed lawn, a wind chime on the porch that clinked soft in the breeze. It looked like the kind of house from a magazine, the kind of house that had never known a bad day. Tank sat on his bike in the driveway for a long moment before he could make himself get off it. A woman named Mrs. Holloway answered the door. She was polite, professional, the kind of careful polite that came from doing a hard job for a long time. She led him to a small sitting room off the kitchen, told him Maddie would be down in a minute, and left the door open a crack, the way the rules required. When Maddie came down the stairs, Tank almost didn't recognize her. She wore clothes he'd never seen, clean and new, picked out by someone who wasn't him. Her hair was combed flat, no wild pieces falling loose the way they did when Preacher tried to braid it and gave up halfway through. But it wasn't the clothes or the hair that hit Tank hardest. It was her face. It was closed. Shuttered, the same look she'd had under the bridge that first night, curled around Bird like the whole world was a fist about to come down on both of them. All the softness that had crept into her over the months, the sass, the eye rolls, the way she used to argue with Diesel about cartoons. It was gone, folded up and put away somewhere Tank couldn't reach. "Hey kid," Tank said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. Maddie sat down across from him, hands folded in her lap, back straight. She didn't look at him. "Hi, how are you doing?" "Fine, you eating okay? Sleeping okay?" "Fine." He wanted to reach across the space between them, wanted to pull her into a hug the way Diesel used to swing her up onto his shoulders, but something in the stiff line of her shoulders told him not to. So he sat there, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together like he was praying, and he waited. "Bird's with a family," Maddie said suddenly, still not looking at him. "A nice family." "Miss," Reyes said. "They have a nursery already. A real one. I know, baby, don't call me that." The words came out sharp, sharper than he'd ever heard from her, and then her chin trembled, just once, before she caught it. "You don't get to call me that anymore." Tank felt something crack in his chest, quiet and terrible. "Maddie, I'm not going anywhere. I know it don't feel like it right now, but I'm fighting for you. Every single day. Filing papers, talking to lawyers, doing everything I know how to do." That's what Casey said. Maddie's voice was flat now, hollow, the voice of someone who'd learned the hard way not to hope. She said she'd come back too. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere in the kitchen, Mrs. Holloway ran water in the sink. The ordinary sound of a house that wasn't theirs. Maddie finally looked up at him, and her eyes were dry, but there was something underneath the dryness that scared Tank more than tears ever could have. "Are you gonna forget about me?" she asked. "Like everyone else has?" The question hung there, small and terrible, and Tank felt it land somewhere deep in his chest, somewhere he hadn't let anyone touch in 45 years. He reached out then, slow, and put his big rough hand over her small folded ones, and he didn't let her pull away. "Look at me," he said, and waited until she did. "I am not everyone else. I don't care what it takes. I don't care how many forms I gotta fill out, how many judges I gotta stand in front of, how many nights I gotta spend not sleeping because I'm scared I'll lose. I am going to be your legal guardian, Maddie. Yours and Bird's. I promise you that. Right here, right now, I'm making that promise. And I have never broken a promise to you yet." Maddie's hand stayed under his for a long moment before the timer on the wall clicked over, and Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway to say the visit was over. Tank rode away from that tidy white house, with his jaw locked so tight it ached, and he didn't stop until he reached the strip mall office with the peeling gold letters that read Legal Aid Services of the Tri-County area. His old Army buddy, Detective Ray Alvarez, had set up the meeting. "She's good," Ray had told him over the phone. "Does this kind of case for cheap because she believes in it." But Tank, listen to me. Don't go in there expecting good news. Go in there ready to work. The attorney's name was Denise Okafor. She was maybe 50, with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair and a stack of manila folders on her desk thick enough to stop a bullet. She didn't stand when Tank walked in, just waved him into the chair across from her and got straight to it. "Mr. Morrison, I've read the file Detective Alvarez sent over. I want to be honest with you, because you strike me as a man who doesn't want to be handled gently." She looked at him over the top of her glasses. "This is going to be hard. Harder than most cases I take." "I figured," Tank said. "You have a criminal record. Assault charge from 20 years back, a stint for possession before that." She flipped open the folder. "The court is going to see that first, before they see anything else. Second, you have no biological or legal relationship to either child. No blood tie, no prior custody, nothing on paper that says you have any right to be in that courtroom at all." Tank's hands, folded on his knees, tightened until the knuckles went pale. "I know how it looks. It's not about how it looks, Mr. Morrison. It's about how it reads on paper, and paper is what judges rule on." Denise leaned forward. "But paper isn't the whole story. Judges are people too, and people respond to proof of a stable, loving home. That's what we build from here. We need character witnesses, people willing to stand up in that courtroom and testify to the kind of man you are now, not the man you were 20 years ago. We need documentation, proof of financial support, medical care, school involvement, anything that shows a pattern, not just good intentions. I got people," Tank said. "Good people. Good isn't enough. I need specifics. Dates, receipts, names of doctors, teachers, anyone who's seen these children thrive under your roof. This can't be a handful of guys saying he's a good man. It has to be a mountain of evidence so tall the judge can't see past it to the record." Tank sat with that a moment, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and thought about all the nights Preacher walked Maddie to school, all the receipts crammed in the drawer in the clubhouse kitchen for formula and diapers and doctor visits. All the hours Diesel spent bouncing Bird on his knee at 3 a.m, so Tank could sleep an hour before his shift. "I think," Tank said slowly, "I might have that mountain already. I just gotta go dig it up." He left Denise's office with a legal pad full of notes and a fire in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He rode straight to the clubhouse, walked in through the back door, and found most of the club already there, working on bikes in the garage bay or playing cards at the long table. "Church," Tank said. "Now, everybody." They filed into the meeting room, boots heavy on the wood floor, confused looks passing between them. Tank stood at the head of the table instead of sitting, and for a long moment he didn't know how to start. "I need help," he finally said. "Not money, not muscle. I need people willing to stand up in a courtroom and swear under oath that I'm fit to raise those girls. I need every receipt, every doctor's note, every single thing this club has done for Maddie and Bird since the night I found them. It's gonna be ugly. My record's gonna come up. They're gonna dig into everything." He looked around the table. "I need to know who's willing to stand next to me when they do." Preacher was the first one on his feet. "Where do I sign?" Then Diesel stood. chair scraping back hard. I got receipts going back to the pharmacy run. I'll get every one of them. One by one, every man in that room rose to his feet, until Tank was standing in a room full of leather and scars and steady, unshaking eyes, every single brother he had, ready to fight. The next 2 weeks moved fast, but Tank made sure nothing got missed. Preacher took charge of the school records. Every morning, rain or shine, he pulled on his old leather jacket over a collared shirt and rode slow beside Maddie on the walk to school, engine idling low so she could keep pace beside him. Then, he'd head straight to the front office and ask Mrs. Fenwick, the school secretary, for a copy of the attendance sheet. At first, she looked at him funny, a gray-bearded biker asking for paperwork like a lawyer. But after the 3rd week, she started having the pages ready before he even asked. Not a single unexcused absence since the placement started, Preacher said one night at the clubhouse table, spreading the papers out like a poker hand. Perfect marks. Teacher notes say she's turning in homework again. Says she smiles more. Tank ran his thumb over the paper like it was something precious. That's gonna matter to the judge. Diesel's job was messier but just as important. He'd kept every receipt since that first night at the all-night pharmacy, stuffed loose in a coffee can in the kitchen. Now he sat at the long table for 3 nights straight, sorting them into piles with the focus of a man defusing a bomb. Formula, diapers, doctor visits. The pediatrician bill from when Bird had an ear infection. The dentist appointment Preacher had set up for Maddie. Diesel taped each receipt to a sheet of paper and wrote the date and what it was for in block letters. Because his handwriting was rough, but he wanted it legible. "Look at this," he said, holding up a sheet covered edge to edge with taped paper. 4 months. Every single week, groceries, every single week, somebody in this club put food on that table. "That's not nothing," Tank said. "Damn right it's not nothing." Diesel's voice cracked a little, and he cleared his throat and looked away, embarrassed by it. The clubhouse itself got attention too. Denise had warned Tank that if things went well, a caseworker might do a final walkthrough before the hearing, and the place needed to look less like a biker bar and more like a home fit for kids. So the brothers spent a weekend bolting cabinet locks onto every low cupboard in the kitchen, covering electrical outlets, padding the sharp corner of the old pool table that had somehow become part of the living space. Someone found a second-hand safety gate at a yard sale and installed it at the top of the back stairs. Preacher hung smoke detectors in every room and tested each one twice. By the end of the 2 weeks, the coffee can was empty, the folder Denise had given Tank was 3 inches thick, and the clubhouse smelled like fresh paint instead of motor oil and cigarettes. Tank stood in the doorway of the back room, now a proper nursery with a crib Diesel had sanded down and repainted himself, and felt something settle in his chest that felt almost like peace. The night before the hearing, Tank rode alone to the group home where Casey was staying. The building was brick and plain, with a chain-link fence around a small square of grass out front. A staff member let him into a visiting room with plastic chairs and a table covered in old magazines. Casey came in wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big, her arms crossed over her chest like she was bracing for bad news. When she saw it was Tank, some of the tension left her shoulders. "Hearing's tomorrow," Tank said, sitting across from her. "I wanted you to hear it from me first, not some letter in the mail. Are they gonna let you keep them?" Her voice was small. "I don't know, but I'm gonna fight like hell." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Denise, my lawyer, she says it'd help if you spoke. Told the judge what you saw. What the club did for those girls when you couldn't. Casey's eyes filled fast, and she wiped at them with her sleeve. You want me there? After everything I did wrong? You didn't do anything wrong, Casey. You were a kid trying to save 2 kids. I need you there because you know the truth better than anybody. Tank held her gaze steady. Will you stand up for them? She didn't hesitate. Yes, whatever you need. I'll be there. The courtroom had that cold official smell, like paper and floor polish. Tank sat at the front table next to Denise, his lawyer, in a collared shirt that felt like a costume. The collar dug into his neck. He kept tugging at it until Denise put a hand on his arm. Stop fidgeting, she whispered. You look fine. He turned around once, and his chest tightened. The whole back of the courtroom was full of iron saints, not one leather cut among them. Preacher sat in a gray button-up shirt, his beard combed neat, hands folded like he was in church. Diesel wore a shirt so tight across his shoulders it looked like it might pop a seam. His thick fingers wrapped around a manila folder like it held gold. Behind them, a dozen more brothers sat shoulder to shoulder, quiet and still, none of them looking like the men Tank rode with every day. They looked like fathers. Uncles, neighbors, Casey sat near the front, twisting a tissue in her hands. She caught Tank's eye and gave him a small, scared nod. Judge Harmon was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back tight and reading glasses perched low on her nose. She flipped through the papers in front of her slowly, her face unreadable. Mr. Morrison, she said, not looking up, you're petitioning for guardianship of 2 minors, Madeline and infant known as Bird, neither of whom are biologically related to you. You have a criminal record from 20 years ago. You are unmarried, and you live in what is listed here as a motorcycle club facility. She finally lifted her eyes. Convince me this is in the children's best interest, and not just a kind gesture that could put them at risk. The words landed like a slap. Tank felt his jaw tighten, but Denise stood calm and steady. Your Honor, we understand the concerns, Denise said. That's why we've brought witnesses who can speak directly to the environment these children have been living in for the past several months. The judge nodded once. Proceed. Preacher was called first. He walked to the stand slow and steady, like a man who'd done nothing but tell the truth his whole life. I walked that little girl to school every single morning, he said, his voice low and even. Rain, cold, didn't matter. Made sure she got there safe, made sure her homework got done. I've got the attendance records right here. Perfect marks since she came to us. He set the papers down gently on the stand like they were fragile. She smiles now, Your Honor. She didn't smile much when we first found her. The judge studied him a long moment, then wrote something down. Diesel went next, and despite his size, he seemed almost shy stepping up to the stand. He held up his taped-together sheets of receipts. Every week, he said, groceries, formula, doctor bills. I know I don't look like the fella you'd expect to be doing laundry and rocking a baby at 2 a.m, but I did. Every night that baby needed feeding, one of us was there. His voice thickened. We didn't have to do any of it. We wanted to. Then came Mr. Alvarez, who owned the diner 2 blocks from the clubhouse. He was a small, wiry man who spoke fast and nervous, clearly out of his element in a courtroom. They came in every week, he said. Paid cash, never asked for credit, never made a fuss. That little girl, Maddie, she'd do her homework at the counter while the big fellas ordered her milkshakes. I never seen kids treated better by anybody. Family or not. Finally, Casey was called. She walked up shaking, gripping the rail of the witness stand like it might keep her steady. I left her under that bridge, Casey said, voice cracking almost immediately. I was 16 and scared, and I thought I was failing them both. But when Tank found her, and found Bird, he didn't call the cops right away and get us all separated. He took us in. Fed us. Never once made me feel small for what I couldn't do. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. That club is the only family that ever stayed. The courtroom went quiet. Judge Harmon took off her reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose, looking, for the first time, less like a judge and more like a tired woman moved by something she hadn't expected. I need time to review everything I've heard today, she said finally, her voice softer than before. I'll have my decision by tomorrow morning. She brought down the gavel with a quiet click. Court is adjourned. The clubhouse did not sleep that night. Nobody said it out loud, but nobody went to bed either. The common room stayed lit, string lights Diesel had put up for Maddie's birthday still glowing yellow over the old couches. Preacher sat in his usual chair, but he wasn't reading his Bible like most nights. He just held it, closed, in his lap, staring at nothing. Remember when Bird had that fever? Diesel said, breaking the quiet. He was sitting on the floor, back against the couch, one boot off like he'd forgotten to take the other one. 3 a.m, screaming her little head off. I didn't know a baby could get that hot and still be okay. You held her the whole night, Preacher said. Wouldn't let anybody take her, even when your arm went numb. Diesel smiled a little, looking down at his hands like they still remembered the weight of her. She stopped crying when I hummed. Didn't matter that I can't carry a tune to save my life. She just wanted the noise, I think. Wanted to know somebody was there. Across the room, one of the younger brothers, a wiry guy named Cole, who'd only patched in 2 years back, sat cleaning a part off his bike that didn't need cleaning. I never had a niece or a nephew, he said quietly. Never thought I'd care much about kids. But Maddie asked me to help her with her math homework last month. Fractions. I hadn't done fractions since I was her age. He shook his head, a small laugh escaping. I stayed up an hour looking up how to do it again so I wouldn't look stupid in front of a 10-year-old. That got a few tired chuckles around the room, but they faded fast, swallowed up by the same worry sitting heavy in every chest. Preacher finally spoke again, his voice low. You all remember what this place used to sound like. Just engines and arguments and old stories nobody believed the second time around. He looked around the room slow, like he was counting faces. Now it sounds like a home. Swing set out back. Drawings taped on the walls, a little girl's laugh echoing down that hallway. He paused. I don't want to go back to the way it was before. Nobody answered him. Nobody had to. Casey sat curled in the corner of the old recliner, knees pulled to her chest, a blanket someone had draped over her hours ago. She hadn't spoken in a while, but her eyes were open, fixed on the door like Tank might walk out of his room any second with news, even though there wasn't going to be any news until morning. Around 3, Diesel got up and made coffee nobody really wanted, just to have something to do with his hands. He poured a cup and set it in front of Casey without a word. She wrapped her fingers around it and whispered a thank you so soft it barely made a sound. Somewhere down the hall, in the room that used to be a storage closet, and was now Maddie's room, the house stayed quiet. Bird was staying with a temporary foster family for the night, per the court's instructions, and the empty crib in the corner of that little room felt like a held breath the whole club was sharing. Tonk sat alone through most of it, in the far corner near the window, not saying much. He wasn't built for waiting. He was built for riding through problems, not sitting still while somebody else decided the shape of his life. But there was nothing to ride toward tonight. No road that led anywhere but forward into whatever the morning would bring. Around 5, with the sky just starting to turn from black to gray, Tonk stood up without a word and walked outside. Nobody stopped him. Nobody followed. The air was cold and damp, the kind of cold that got into your bones before sunrise. Tank walked to the edge of the gravel lot and looked out toward the highway, toward the dark shape of the overpass sitting low against the horizon, the same bridge where a decade of running from responsibility had ended the night his headlight caught a girl in a coat too big for her. He stood there a long moment, hands in his pockets, breath fogging in front of him. "I don't pray much," he said quietly, to no one, to everyone, to whatever might be listening. Never saw the point. But I'm asking now. His voice caught rough and low. Just give them the family they deserve. Give me the chance to be it. The sky kept turning gray, slow and steady, the stars fading one by one, and Tank stood there watching the bridge until the sun began to rise. The courthouse hallway smelled like floor wax and old coffee, the same as it had every other time Tank had walked through it these past few weeks. But today felt different. Today felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Tank stood outside the courtroom doors in a collared shirt that Preacher had ironed for him that morning, the sleeves a little too short on his thick forearms. He kept tugging at the collar like it was strangling him, though everyone in the hallway knew it wasn't the shirt making it hard to breathe. Behind him, the club had shown up in force. Diesel wore a button-down shirt that strained across his shoulders, his hands folded in front of him like a man at a funeral, though he kept glancing at Casey beside him, giving her small nods of encouragement. Preacher stood tall despite his years, his Bible tucked under one arm, not to read from, just to hold, the way some men held a lucky coin. Cole was there too, and a dozen other brothers, all of them out of their cuts, all of them looking like strangers to themselves in their borrowed respectability. Casey stood near Tank, twisting her hands together, her eyes red-rimmed from crying the night before and from not sleeping at all. She'd worn the only nice dress she owned, one Preacher's wife had picked out for her from a thrift store 2 towns over. She looked so young standing there, 16 going on 40, carrying weight no teenager should ever have to carry. "You okay?" Tank asked her quietly. "No," Casey said, honest as ever. "Are you?" Tank almost smiled. "No," the bailiff called them in. The courtroom was smaller than Tank remembered from the last hearing, though nothing about it had changed. Same hard benches, same tired fluorescent lights, same flag standing stiff in the corner. The judge, a woman named Harmon with silver hair pulled back tight and reading glasses perched low on her nose, was already seated when they filed in. She had a folder open in front of her, thick with papers, thicker than it had been weeks ago. Tank recognized some of the pages sticking out. Preacher's written statement, Diesel's testimony about the 2 a.m. feedings, the diner owner's receipts, school attendance records with Maddie's name on them, a whole month of perfect days. The caseworker sat at her table across the room, her expression unreadable as always, though Tank thought he saw something softer in her eyes today than there had been before. Judge Harmon looked over her glasses at the room, at the rows of leather-clad men who weren't wearing leather today, at the teenage girl clutching a stranger's dress, at the grown man with rough hands folded so tight his knuckles had gone white. "This has been an unusual case," she began, her voice steady and even. "I want to say that plainly, because I don't think anyone in this room would disagree with me." Tank's heart pounded so hard he was sure the whole courtroom could hear it. "I have read every statement submitted," the judge continued. "I have reviewed the school records, the medical records, the financial documentation." She paused, glancing down at the folder, then back up. "I have rarely seen a child's well-being so thoroughly documented by a community that owes her nothing by blood, and everything by choice." She looked directly at Tank now. "Mr. Morrison, your record is not clean. I want to acknowledge that. But a record is not the same as a heart. And everything in this file tells me your heart has been in the right place since the night you found that little girl under a bridge." Casey's hand found Tank's sleeve, gripping it tight. "It is the ruling of this court," Judge Harmon said, "that emergency guardianship of Madeline and the infant referred to as Bird be granted to Thomas Morrison, effective immediately." The room seemed to exhale all at once. Furthermore, the judge added, raising a hand before the sound could fully rise, given the clear bond between the sisters and the testimony regarding Casey's commitment to her education, "This court is arranging a kinship placement plan that will allow Casey to remain closely involved in her sisters' lives, with continued support for her GED studies." That was when the courtroom erupted. Chairs scraping, arms flying open, Diesel's booming voice breaking into something that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob, and Casey collapsing into Tank's chest, both of them shaking. The swing set caught the last orange light of evening, its chains creaking soft in the breeze. It hadn't been fancy, just something Diesel and Cole had bolted together on a Saturday afternoon, cursing at the instructions and laughing when they got the bolts backward twice. But it stood there now in the yard behind the clubhouse, worn smooth already from months of small hands gripping the chains. Inside, the clubhouse smelled like spaghetti sauce and garlic bread. Preacher's wife had taken over the kitchen most nights now, and nobody complained, not even the brothers who used to eat gas station sandwiches for dinner and call it fine. The long table that once held poker chips and beer bottles was set with mismatched plates, and taped along the wall behind it were Maddie's drawings. Dozens of them, held up with strips of silver duct tape because nobody had thought to buy real tape. Crayon Sons. A lopsided house. A drawing of a big man on a motorcycle with the words Tank ANDME written in careful, proud letters underneath. Maddie sat at the table, swinging her feet, 11 years old now, her hair longer, her face rounder than it had been under that bridge. She was laughing at something Diesel said, some joke about spaghetti noodles being worms, and Bird sat in a high chair beside her, banging a spoon against the tray, her cheeks smeared with sauce. Casey came in through the back door, home from her GED class, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked tired, the good kind of tired, the kind that came from working hard toward something instead of running from something. She dropped a stack of papers on the counter, practice tests, and Preacher looked up from the stove. "How'd it go?" he asked. "I think I passed the math one," Casey said, and there was something in her voice that hadn't been there months ago. Steadiness, hope that had learned to trust itself. Tank sat at the head of the table, tugging at nothing now. No collar too tight, no courtroom waiting outside. Just a plate of spaghetti in front of him and his family around him, loud and messy and alive. After dinner, when the dishes were stacked and the sun had dipped below the tree line, Bird pushed herself up from the floor where she'd been playing with a set of plastic blocks. She wobbled, one hand against the couch, and Maddie noticed first. "Look," Maddie said, quiet, like she didn't want to scare it away. Bird took a step, then another. Her arms out for balance, her whole small body trembling with the effort, and the room went hushed the way rooms do when something small and enormous is happening all at once. She was heading straight for Tank. Diesel set down his coffee cup without a sound. Preacher stood in the kitchen doorway, dish towel forgotten in his hands. Casey grabbed Maddie's arm, and Maddie grabbed hers back, both of them grinning so wide it looked like it hurt. Bird took her last wobbly step and grabbed onto Tank's knee, steadying herself, looking up at him with those same eyes that had once peeked out from under a too-big coat beneath a bridge. "Tank," she said, clear as anything, proud of herself, like she'd been saving the word for exactly this moment. The room exploded. Diesel let out a whoop that rattled the windows, scooping Bird up into the air until she shrieked with laughter. Maddie was laughing and crying at the same time, and Casey wrapped her arms around both of them. Preacher just stood there, shaking his head, smiling the smile of a man who'd seen a lot of things in his life and still found room to be amazed. Tank didn't say much. He couldn't. His throat was too tight. Later, after the noise had settled and the kids were tucked into bed, Tank sat on the porch steps with Preacher, the night quiet around them, crickets singing somewhere out past the swing set. "You did good, brother," Preacher said, handing him a cup of coffee. Tank turned the cup slow in his hands. "I keep thinking about that night," he said. "Under the bridge. Everybody keeps saying I saved her." Preacher waited, the way he always did, letting the silence do its work. "But I didn't," Tank said quietly. "She saved me. All three of them did. Gave me a family I didn't even know I was missing." I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.